All right, well, we have a lot to dive into today. I know I'm excited for this topic. I know based on the questions that have been submitted ahead of time that you all are excited for this topic. So we're going to go ahead and get started and use every minute of this hour that we can. So welcome to the Lowdown. My name is Aubrey Gallegos. I'm the programs manager for the Good Meat Project. I'm also a producer. I raise grass-fed lamb and pastured poultry in southeastern Washington. And the Lowdown, for those of you who have not been here before, this is a peer-to-peer series that we do for farmers. We're also this year launching them for butchers and chefs, and it's a chance to learn from your fellow farmers and ranchers and food industry professionals on various topics to help get your meat to market. So today we are focusing on USDA meat product labeling, which I know is a big topic for many of us. Just a couple housekeeping things as we get started. You're welcome to keep yourself on Zoom, but turn your camera on. I always get those mixed up. So we'll have a time for question and answer at the end of this, but you're welcome to drop your questions in the chat as we go along. We will keep track of them and make sure that we get to as many of them as possible. For those who are just entering, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can put your name, where you're calling in from, and what you raise or sell. And the Lowdown is a resource that we're able to offer through our Farmin program. We're very good at acronyms. It stands for Farmer and Rancher Marketing Innovation Network. Meredith, if you'll pop to the next slide for us. Lovely. Perfect. Oh, go back one. There you go. Perfect. So we're able to offer this series free of charge for producers like you because of generous donations. So if you want to take the next step in supporting this programming, if you get to the end of this and you think, man, that was really worth my time, we would sure appreciate any contribution that you're able to make. And then we have a few simple community agreements that you can read in this next slide here. They really just boil down to be kind, be open, and we're here to just connect and learn from each other and create space for everybody to learn and ask questions. No dumb questions here. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. This is our first lowdown of the year, and I'm always excited for our lowdowns, but I am especially excited for this topic. I woke up a little giddy today because this is such a great one to nerd out on, and it's so applicable to anyone who has who's trying to sell meat, and I know it can be very confusing. So we hope that we can clear up some of the regulations and rules and all of that around labels. We have two really amazing guests today, Steph Harmon and Cindy McCafferty. They've been working together for what, 8 years? Quite a number of years. And Steph Harmon is a USDA product label specialist with label compliance solutions. That is a mouthful, Steph. I don't know how you introduce yourself. She's based in Western Nebraska, and she actually runs her own herd of commercial cattle. She's been working in the meat industry for almost 25 years now and has extensive experience in USDA product labeling for retail, food service, claims, which we'll dive into today, like nutrition, third-party certifications, how animals are raised. She's worked with a number of small USDA establishments as well as independent ranchers like Cindy to help them meet their labeling needs. And we'll dive into all the various needs that you may have with your labels. And she's got a BA in agricultural business and a minor in marketing, which is our dream combination here. So we're really excited to hear from Steph. Meredith and I had a great conversation with Steph and Cindy, and very, very knowledgeable. So excited to have you here, Steph. And then our other guest here today is Cindy McCafferty. So Cindy is a rancher with McCafferty Ranch. She's a retired nurse, and she and her husband have been ranching together for 35 years. I know she's got your calf cams on right now. It's calving season. And a really cool thing about Cindy's specific business, in 2016, they built a hydroponic system and began finishing and selling beef direct to consumer. So they now ship their beef nationwide. And in 2022, they partnered up with a neighbor and they began Integrated Fodder Incorporated, which designs and sells robotic hydroponic systems, which has also added some really interesting things to Cindy's labels and labeling needs. So thrilled to welcome you both, Cindy and Steph. Hi, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So great to have you. All right, we're just going to go ahead and dive right into our topic. Steph, let's just start with a real basic question. Can you tell us who who needs to have USDA labels on their meat, and what's some of the basic information that labels need to have on them?
Sure. So if you want to sell your product across state lines, you need to work with a USDA processing facility to be able to do that. Your basic requirements are going to include a product or a cut name, your net weight, the USDA establishment number, a handling statement such as keep frozen or keep refrigerated, safe handling instructions, your contact information, and then ingredients and nutrition facts. And depending on what your product is, that will determine which of those features you do or don't need. For example, if you're selling a jerky product, you don't have to have a handling statement on the package like keep frozen, or safe handling instructions, which are just for raw meat products.
Awesome. And Cindy, will you tell us just a little bit about how you found Steph, how the two of you got linked up?
We were going to a processing plant for our beef. And when I started to want to label our beef and looking at selling across state lines and individual cuts, I talked with them and said, how do I get started on this process? And they said to give Steph a call. So I was super lucky that I got her name and number early on in the process before I went down some roads that I didn't even know what I was doing.
And tell us a little bit about when you first started that labeling process with Steph. Was there anything that surprised you or that you had to change where you had one idea of how it was going to go and then talked to Steph and realized, oh, I've actually got to do this totally differently?
Well, the first thing that I had to come to understand was that we had to have like a program written for, and I don't mean like a computer program, I just mean like a statement of how we ranch and what we do. So that when we came up with label ideas, it matches up with the way that we're practicing. And so that was my first thing. I'm like, what's a program? And so we wrote up a program and described what we do. And then from there, stuff really helped. It's a very sometimes confusing process to take what you want as a graphic to get it on the label and to go through the verification stuff with USDA and all that. So Steph was really helpful to us for that. I don't know, I could have done it without her help at that point.
And Cindy, what are some of the claims that you have on your labels?
We have printed out so I won't forget any. Natural and pasture raised. And we also have 100% grass fed and grass and sprout finished. So we were able to get the sprout thing on our label. So we're glad for that.
Okay, tell us about the sprout thing for those who have not heard about your hydroponic system.
Mhm. Yeah, we sprout barley. We can sprout more than just barley, but we sprout barley for the most part and feed it to our animals as their finishing ration. And it's almost their entire finishing ration for about 150 days before harvest. So it is a sprout, so it's considered a grass. So we can put that on our label that's grass and sprout finished. And super nutritious. We have excellent results with it. People are excited about the healthiness of the beef because of the healthiness of what they're eating. So that makes us a little bit unique from some other grass finished businesses.
Yeah, So cool. I had not heard of that before I chatted with you, and what a cool model. And Steph or Cindy, can either of you tell us a little bit about, for claims like that that are very specific to an operation like Sprout Finished, what's the process of getting that onto your label like?
So, we just need to develop, like Cindy had talked about, a program or an affidavit, basically declaring exactly what you do and how you do it to support the claim that you want to make on your label.
Great. And Cindy, you said so Sprout Finished and then grass-fed, all natural. Was there another one?
Pasture raised.
Pasture raised. So
Mhm.
we definitely got a number of questions ahead of time about just what the requirements are for including some of those labels. Can you talk a little bit about well, really all three of them have come up, but maybe all natural was one that I didn't know a whole lot about ahead of time. Can you start with that one? What are some of the parameters for including all natural?
Sure. So all natural is actually, defined by USDA as minimally processed and no artificial ingredients. So it's a post-processing claim versus a raising claim, which is kind of a common misconception. A lot of consumers think that all natural means raised without antibiotics or growth hormones and on a vegetarian diet, but it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to USDA. So when you want to put that claim on your product, you have to also include the disclaimer, minimally processed, no artificial ingredients, and have that label claim approved by USDA as long as it does meet that definition. So basically, all single ingredient meat cuts, all fresh meat cuts will meet that claim. But if you start making multi-ingredient products, sausages, jerky, sticks, things like that, then we have to take a look at the ingredients that are going in that product and make sure that each of one of those meets the definition of minimally processed and no artificial ingredients, as well as the complete finished product.
So there's post-processing claims and then there are claims about how the animals were actually raised. So
Yep.
tell us a little bit about grass-fed and pasture-raised. What are some of the parameters for those?
Sure. So USDA looks at grass-fed, 100% grass-fed and finished, 100% grass-fed and grass-finished as all the same claim. So, and it means that the animal has been pasture-fed or grass-fed for their entire life. No grains, no non-grass feeds throughout that animal's lifetime. And they do also require that animals be raised on pasture for the majority of their lifetime or during the growing season for your area. So,
And regenerative, how does that one play in?
so regenerative is the big buzzword right now and popular claim. It's not a defined claim by USDA, so they rely on you to define that claim. So it can be defined however, whatever regenerative means to you is how you can define it, as long as you're able to support that. So whether it be through rotational grazing, through cover cropping, through watershed management, you just have to define what regenerative means to you on your label or on your website with a link to your website on your label. And then we support it through a signed affidavit describing those claims and how you actually practice those things.
So there are
So,
claims that already have USDA definitions, and then there are claims like regenerative where you get to define them. And then I imagine, and Cindy, I'm curious if you have thoughts on what this has been like for you all. I imagine there's a back and forth then between your marketing and your claims. You know, if you're claiming regenerative and you have a definition of that on your website, and then realize you want to make that a label and then have to perhaps change that definition a little bit to fit what the USDA is needing for the label? Is there a back and forth there between your marketing and your label definitions?
Yeah, there definitely is, because a website person doesn't really understand what you need. You know, they just kind of put up what you kind of talk to them about or whatever. So yeah, there's a little education there, obviously, with your website people. And that was new to me at one point too, that I'm like, oh, you mean USDA could look at my website and it's got to match up with my label as well. Um, but if you just start with your program and know how you're going to raise your animals, then and stick to that, you're good.
Cindy, was like with that, was there a reason why you chose those specific label claims? Was it because that was like a really comprehensive view of your program? Was it for marketing? Was it for certain customers?
Um, Probably a little bit of both, or of all of those things. Certainly, we wanted to be able to claim and state so people can know what we are doing. So we're trying to be transparent, and customers or consumers are wanting that more. So that's kind of why we did what we did. Um, and it is a little bit of a marketing tool as well, because there's people that really care about those things, and that's important to them. So we want to have it there for them.
Would you say that with your customers, do you interface with them a lot, or are they just buying online and not necessarily having met you at all?
No, they most have not met me, obviously, but I get a lot of customers that just call me up and, I answer my phone all the time. So I visit with a lot of customers. I have quite a few customers that we just text periodically even. Um, and yeah, I have a pretty good relationship with some of my repeat customers. So, but there we have a large customer base that, I don't. So
Would you say that having these labels or these claims on your labels kind of helps you share your story a little bit more? Is that kind of, or like I said, is it just something that you did for yourself to be able to
mhm.
have that out there?
Well, I think mostly it's our website that uh, promotes our claims, our label claims for us, because that's what people see. And then when they order something and it's on the label, it just reinforces what they thought they were buying. Yeah.
And that's Meredith Rose, our programs coordinator. Many of you have probably emailed with Meredith. She is key to our the running of our programs here at Good Meat Project. So she'll be popping in with questions and comments, and she's also managing the chat questions. So we see some of these questions that are coming in. And Tony had a good one. He asked, is there any inspection or enforcement of claims?
So, to get started, we have to get any claims approved, for your product label through USDA before you print your labels and use them. After you get that approval, there is not any on-site inspection on your ranch. But rather the inspector at the processor might look at your label and want to see the approval that goes with it. That would be the only real follow-up inspection, so to speak, after the fact.
But in theory, USDA could be looking at your website and double checking that, yeah.
Yeah, they can. They don't really have the breadth to do that. They'll focus on labeling, but they do say that anything that you use to promote your product, your brochures, your website, your, any kind of point of purchase materials at the store level, that's all, subject to labeling rules. So you do want to be mindful of that.
And we talked about grass-fed, we talked about regenerative, all natural. Can you chat a little bit, Steph, about pasture-raised?
Sure. So pasture raised means exactly that. Pasture raised for the lifetime of the animal, not raised in confinement. And that's for red meat animals. For poultry, it means that poultry are on pasture, on on pasture with vegetation, for their lifetime, versus free range, which just means they have access to pasture, but they're not always raised on pasture.
Okay. Cindy, when you first started with all this, were there any claims that you wanted to make that you realized didn't make sense once you kind of got into the process, or was it fairly straightforward?
It was fairly straightforward, because we knew what we were doing. And for instance, we knew we were not going to pursue organic at this time. So, that wasn't something that we looked into. So yeah, we just knew what we wanted to do and just pursued what was going to fit.
Was there anything you wish you'd known before you started?
Yeah. It's more difficult than what I thought as far as navigating the process, but thankfully I ran into Steph, like I said at the beginning. So that just cleared a lot of hurdles for us. So we were very fortunate. And I do have a family member who worked with USDA for the USDA for 30 years. That was also very helpful to us. So we had a little inside edge. Mhm.
Steph, are there common questions or even misconceptions that you see repeatedly from the farmers and ranchers that you work with?
A lot of times people don't know that they have to have their label claims approved, before they get started. So that would be a big misconception. And a lot of times too, people will call and they'll tell me that they just dropped off, 3 steers and that they need labeling. And it doesn't leave us a whole lot of time. We can do it, but it doesn't leave a whole lot of time. And so I would just say, be sure to leave, maybe like a 4 to 6 week window minimum, maybe longer, to be working on your labels. Talk to your establishment that you're processing with when you book your appointment. Let them know if you want to do custom labeling and ask them what options they have and if they are able to accommodate that. Most of them are really great about it. And then, yeah, start working through that process. Leave yourself as much time as possible.
So 4 to 6 weeks ideally is the time frame to give yourself.
Yep.
Steph, can you expand on that a little bit and tell us how it works with, you want to get your logo, you want to have your label claims, and then printing and getting your label on the actual meat, as far as what you've experienced with your clients? How does that work?
Yeah. So when I first talk to a new client, we'll discuss where they're processing at and what they're actually processing. If it's going to be single ingredient or multi-ingredient products, then I will ask them for their logo, for what claims they want to make, and we'll discuss what goes into supporting those claims and make sure that they understand the meaning of them and can support those. And then we'll take their logo and their claims, their contact information, and create a label for their processor's specific printer style. Proof that out to them. And then in the meantime, I'll also be working with them to gather supporting documentation, and usually just in the form of a affidavit that I'll draft that supports the claims. What they do for the lifetime of the animal for that claim, what they do with non-conforming animals. For example, if you make a raised without antibiotics claim, and you have an animal get sick and you need to treat them, of course, we do that for humane reasons. So we just need to put in that affidavit, if an animal gets sick, what you do, you treat them, and how you segregate them, probably by ear tag. Put the affidavit together, have the producer review it, make sure that it actually reflects what they do. When it's correct, I'll have them sign it, and then when they sign off on the label, then submit into USDA for approval. And then once the label comes back approved, then we can discuss printing the labels as well.
So real quick, so are you in contact with the processor as far as like getting dimensions and the appropriate labels, or is that something that the farmer or rancher then conveys to you?
Most times I work with a lot of USDA establishments, so I'm familiar with their specifications. But if I'm not, I'll offer to reach out to that processor and ask the correct questions, or I'll poach the rancher and asking for that information so that we make it as efficient as possible for that establishment. We're not making any changes. We're doing what they already do and just trying to be very efficient for them.
We're getting some really great questions in the chat here. Sarah asked, do we need a separate printed label for each processor? Does each label need its own processor location?
Okay. So it's very likely that you will need a separate label for each processor that you work with if you work with multiple ones, which is very common because it's hard to get slaughter dates these days. So a lot of establishments use different printer scale systems. So it's unfortunate, but most times you'll have to have a different label set up for each of your processors. And then what was the second part of that question?
She said, does each label need its own processor location?
Oh, not necessarily. So USDA allows, you have to have contact information on your label, and it can be done in one of two ways. You can say, processed for the rancher, address, city, state, and zip of that rancher, or you can say processed by the processor and then their address, city, state, and zip. Most people prefer to do their own contact information. And of course, the label will also have the USDA establishment legend on it. And that will be specific to that establishment that processed it for you.
Okay. And can you give us even just a ballpark? What kind of cost are folks looking at for going through this approval process?
Sure. So there's no cost to do it through USDA. You can do it yourself if you are confident in being able to do that. USDA doesn't charge anything. The processors, I can't necessarily speak for them that they would charge anything. If they do any kind of legwork for you, they might. So it would just be my charge, basically.
Yeah. And how long is a label claim good for? Tony asked this, is there a requirement for renewing it?
No, so once you get your label approved, as long as you don't make any changes, it's good for forever at that establishment. If you make changes to your label graphically, or you want to add claims or remove claims, we need to do an updated label approval. If you add claims, we have to go back into USDA, but if you remove claims, we can do a generic approval. Which means you don't have to go back into USDA. USDA allows certain changes to be made to labels that they don't need to see, and therefore they call it a generic approval. If you change establishments, say you get a label with claims approved at one establishment, and then you have another processing appointment at a separate establishment, we can do a generic approval from the first establishment over to the second establishment.
And you and Cindy have, from what I've witnessed, seem to have developed a friendship over the last 8 years of working together. Can you give us a little insight into that, what that relationship is like between a rancher and their label compliance person like you, Steph? What would make it necessary even to continue to have that long-term relationship?
Yeah, well, this is an important part of Cindy's business. Selling her meat, that label is her business card on every package of meat that gets sold. I want it to be correct. I want it to be compliant and something that she doesn't have to worry about but one time. And yes, Cindy and I have developed a wonderful friendship. She's been absolutely fantastic to work with, and I put my heart and soul into working with my customers, and they do the same for me. I love to be a part of the behind the scenes team to help help ranchers like Cindy be successful in this and achieve their goals.
I think that's one of the reasons I was so excited to have both of you on this lowdown is you think USDA labels, and for me, I think headache, stress, regulations, and it's really cool to see that play out as a friendship. And Steph, I can feel your passion for this. Uh, Tell us just briefly. Let's do a quick into your story. Tell us briefly about what got you into label compliance and why you're so passionate about it.
Sure. So, a job early on in my career for a wonderful family I worked for, had a natural and organic meat company, and I started in their marketing department and did a variety of things, but one of my duties was doing USDA label compliance. And at the time we had to have every label approved by USDA, no matter if it had claims or not. So it was very time intense. And then they started out with just single ingredient beef and then moved into all other forms of proteins, bison, lamb, chicken, turkey, veal, pork, and then got into multi-ingredient product labeling. And with their huge growth and extensions, labeling became my sole function. And so I got the opportunity to learn how to do labeling for all of those products, multiple different types of claims, natural, organic, third-party certifications, retail, wholesale, multi-ingredient, single ingredient. So it, yeah, it was a wonderful experience.
Do you get a little thrill when there's one that kind of puzzles you, when there's kind of a new claim that you're like, oh, we got to dive into this. We get to figure this out.
Oh yeah, I learn new things in this all the time. You know, as many years as I've been doing this, it still teaches me something every day. And you know, the regulations, there's some that are defined, some that aren't. The reviewers, sometimes they'll look at claims subjectively. So we, you know, sometimes have to work a little bit harder to prove a claim or to, you know, say something unique. But yeah, it's all worth it in the end. And USDA generally, if you can support that claim, they'll approve it.
Yeah. And Steph, will you take just a second to walk us through kind of the nitty-gritty of starting this process for folks who are coming to this lowdown, have never done any of this. This is all brand new to them. Literally, you know, where do they start? Do they go to the USDA website? How do they get started in this whole process?
I would suggest talking to your processor first and letting them know what your goals are. You want to collaborate with them from the beginning and let them know, I want to do a custom label so that I can sell my product at farmers markets, so that I can sell my product across state lines or at the local grocery store. And see what they have to say. Like I said, most establishments are open to doing custom type of labeling and accommodating those requests. And then they will generally work with that customer if they want to take on the labeling and help them walk through it, or if they want to send them to an expediter like me to help them through the process. If a lot of establishments, you know, they're just like everybody, they wear 10 different hats an hour. So a lot of them don't want to mess with the labeling side of things, the detailed part of it. So if they work with somebody like me, then they'll give that customer my phone number and we'll start working together and do the same thing, you know, talk about where you're processing, what claims you want to make, what your end goals are. And then we'll take the logo, your logo, claims, your contact information, and create a label for use at that establishment in their specific format. Walk you through the claim supports, depending on what you put on your label, get that in place, and then I'll submit through USDA to get those labels approved. If you don't make any special claims on your label, then we don't have to submit into USDA, but I'll still fill out the approval form for that customer to provide to the establishment so they have it on file for their inspector. And then after the approvals are done, then we can talk about the label printing process.
And are there many folks like you out there, Steph? Is this a common role, or is it really just kind of a handful of folks around the country who are doing what you're doing?
You know, I'd say there are other folks. I'd say it's a handful. There's not a whole lot, but there are other companies that do this. Prime Labels is a good resource. They kind of wrote the book on USDA label expediting and compliance work as a third party, as an expediter. They're excellent to work with as well.
We have so many great questions coming in, and we got a lot of questions preloaded for this as well. So we're going to try and get through as many as possible in the time that we have here. And we will also share Steph's information in the follow-up email. If your question does not get answered here, you can certainly reach out to Steph. And we also, Meredith dropped in the chat here, it's up a little bit if you scroll, but the USDA labeling and label approval page, which Steph shared with us, which is also a great place to get started. So I'm going to hit a few more questions in the chat, and then we've got some questions that came in beforehand. Feel free to keep dropping questions in here. So Jennifer was asking, let's talk a little bit for a minute about certifications and nutrition separately, but let's hit both of those. Jennifer asked, are third-party certifications required for most claims?
No, they're not. They can be. USDA is encouraging the use of third-party certifications for your claims, but they are not a requirement. Most claims can be supported with a signed affidavit and segregation protocol, but things like organic, that has to be third-party certified, non-GMO project verified, Audubon certified, American Grass-Fed Association certified. Those are all examples of third-party certifications that you would have to be certified by them to be able to make those specific claims. But for example, grass-fed, you can make that claim even if you're not certified by the American Grass-Fed Association.
And when are nutritional labels required?
That's a good question. So nutrition labeling is required on major cuts of single ingredients, beef, pork, veal, lamb, chicken, turkey. And it's also required on multi-ingredient cuts if you sell more than 100,000 pounds of that particular cut annually.
Okay.
And just to give a little bit of a caveat there, if you make any nutrition claims on your label, say you make a jerky and you want to make a nutrition claim like no added sugar, then even if you sell less than 100,000 pounds of that product annually, because you have a nutrition claim on that label, you would have to have nutrition facts. You wouldn't fall under that exemption anymore.
Okay. And we had a question come in through the registration form about safe handling instructions and when they need to be printed on the labels by your processor versus the ones that you can get pre-printed on the rolls. And then they also, well, we'll start there. Do you have any insights, Steph, onto the difference there for folks who are buying those pre-printed rolls versus getting them done at the processor?
Yeah, generally your processor will add safe handling instructions to the label as they print it out. It has to be fully labeled at the establishment, so it shouldn't be necessary for the producer to provide safe handling instructions in addition to the establishment, in addition to the label that they're already putting on, because it will include them.
Okay. We also had, let me see where that was. We had an interesting, oh yeah. So, this was a good question. Someone asked, they said, we're in the process of expanding into wholesale marketing. How do you distinguish your product while using the processor's USDA approved label? So folks who are going into wholesale and are going to have their product mixed in with many others, is there a way to distinguish through this process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so every establishment will keep that particular producer's products segregated, basically from slaughter to further processing to packaging to boxing. And the beauty about most custom labels is they can be used for retail purposes or for wholesale purposes. So for wholesale products, you're selling a case of product that's bulk more so than case ready individual packaged cuts for the retail consumer. So for wholesale product, you're generally going to have a case of 2 or 3 large pieces of meat that are not individually labeled inside, but rather on the outside of the case, versus your retail labels products. That'll be your smaller consumer packages that are individually labeled and can be in one case, but can be sold individually, versus wholesale product is sold by the case. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that definitely answered that. I'm gonna hit some of the questions here in the chat. We've got a lot. So this is a good question. It seems obvious, but I've had this question before as well. What's the definition of selling across state lines for people who are deciding whether they need this? Is that something, it sounds simple, but is it something where the person who's buying from you, their billing address needs to be in your state? Does it mean that you are literally transporting or sending your product across state lines? How is that defined?
I've never really gotten into the nitty-gritty of that to be able to answer that very well. I would say that if your customer is not within your state boundaries, you would want to be USDA inspected. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we also had a question, this kind of went back to when we were talking about pasture raised. What is the definition of confinement?
Confinement would be like a feedlot setting, or a setting where you have your livestock in one pen where you're feeding them, watering them there, and they don't have access to pasture. Versus being out on pasture, but a lot of times you'll see pens built around your water source. So you've got a place where you can gather everything, as long as those gates are left open. So obviously they can come into water and then go right back out to pasture. They're not confined to that one stationary place. Yeah, that's how I would define it. Obviously, feedlots would be confinement.
And then we had a question from Jared. What are the rules around dates for best by or sell by?
Good question. So food dating and user freeze by, best by, those aren't actually required by USDA. They're only required on infant formulas and foods. So that kind of falls outside of my realm of labeling. USDA does have a guidance document on it that I'd be happy to share with you, Aubrey, to forward to Jared or direct, either way.
And then Emily asks, in Montana, we've seen a lot of back and forth legislation around, I'm going to say it's pronounced MCOOL, MCOOL, so which stands for mandatory country of origin labeling. And she wanted to know, could you speak to the potential benefits of using that label and why this issue seems to keep resurfacing in policy conversations? What role do you think small producers play in shaping or responding to these changes? So a few questions in there.
Yeah, great question. So mandatory country of origin labeling is not required on beef or pork products. It was rescinded quite a few years ago. So it's just required on goat, lamb, and chicken, I believe, poultry. So mandatory country of origin labeling, there was a lot of A lot of people were for it, obviously, because you want people to know, what product is born, raised, and harvested in the USA, versus out of country. And it's a great selling point too. There's another camp that feels like it's a little bit restrictive just because of the segregation issues at the processing level. It created a lot of extra efforts and work and cut efficiencies down a little bit. So I'll speak a little bit to USDA just updated their product of the USA and made in the USA claims last year, to where those claims now hold a lot more meaning, and they are defined now to mean, if you say product of the USA, it means that has to mean that your product is born, raised, harvested, and packaged in the USA. Same thing with made in the USA. If you want to say product of the USA, same thing. And then on multi-ingredient products, say you make a sausage with cheese in it, cheddar bratwurst. Your meat has to be born, raised, harvested, and packaged in the USA. And then all of your ingredients, your non-meat ingredients, not including spices and flavorings. So for example, your cheese would have to be made in Montana of Montana ingredients as well. So USDA has enforced and bolstered that claim to mean more. So we have that as a voluntary claim versus the mandatory country of origin labeling, which it's kind of goes back and forth. And you have a lot of people that support it and some that don't. So but it can be a voluntary claim now that has a lot more backbone than it used to.
It must be so interesting from your seat too to see the trends that kind of come and go with our food systems. And on that topic, Larry said, there's been talk around omega-3, especially omega-3 ratio tests. And what are some of the requirements for labels with that?
Oh, so omega-3s. So if you want to make an omega-3 fatty acid claim on your label, you've probably noticed that nutrition facts panels don't actually have a line item for omega-3. So in absence of that, it also doesn't have a prescribed daily value for that nutrient. But so USDA will only allow a claim stating the exact amount of omega-3 grams per serving of that product. So X grams or X milligrams omega-3 fatty acids per serving, but they won't allow claims like good source of or provides 10 grams. It can only be X grams or X milligrams omega-3 fatty acids per serving.
Okay. Wow, the time has flown by. I knew it would. We're getting close to the end, and I know there's a lot more questions that I have on our list that were sent ahead of time. If you have any burning questions, throw them in the chat. We probably won't get to everything today, but we'll do our very best. Next time we'll make this 6 hours, Steph and Cindy, don't worry. I wanted to get to there's a couple really good questions that came in ahead of time. One, so somebody submitted this ahead of time. She said, some of our meat animals are sourced from off property and raised off property, and some are organic while others are not. Could you speak to strategies and requirements for delineating cattle or pigs that are sourced from multiple places and have differing designations in regards to certifications like organic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you definitely want to have a segregation protocol in place to keep track of who's who, how they were raised, whether it be, separate pastures, separate pens, ear tags, things like that. And then also, that will help you keep track of those live animals. And then once you go to the processor, then the processor will also have a segregation protocol in place to keep those live animals segregated through the boxed meat, to help out.
Oof, I think we have time for one more question, and this came in also ahead of time, and I love this question. Steph, could you speak to what do you see as the future of label claims verification?
That's a good question. So in USDA's most recent guidance document for animal raising claims, most claims that they talk about, they strongly encourage the use of third-party certifiers for most claims. It's not a requirement, but it's something that they advocate for because they're not able to be on location and see. So the affidavit does work. And I think it'll probably continue to be allowed just because to third-party certifiers are generally a fee for service. And you know, that might be limiting to some people. So I think USDA will probably always allow affidavits. I hate to speak for them, but just my thought process would be they would allow that affidavit system, but very strongly encourage third-party certifications, which, you know, is good overall too for you as a producer. It doesn't hurt either if it's, you know, in line with your goals.
Wonderful. Okay, I know we have so many more questions, but I've got to wrap us up for time here. To kind of close us out, Cindy, let's start with you. Will you just share for folks who are interested in learning more about your operation, especially the fact that you all do hydroponics and you do sprout finished, what's the best way for them to find you?
Well, our website is McCafferty Ranch. And we have a little bit about our ranch and how we raise our beef and a little bit about hydroponics there. And that's where we sell both our local quarter, half, and whole beef and our individual cuts as well.
And you have a video on YouTube on rolling out the sprouts that I saw, that if anyone's curious about this process is worth watching for sure.
We've updated a little bit though since then. Now we have a robot that does some of our work. So we're not actually packing out fodder in wheelbarrows anymore.
Amazing. And Steph, for the many folks here who have more questions, what's the best way for them to find you and hire you on for your services?
So you can reach out. You can email me at steph@labelcompliancesolutions.com. That's probably the best way.
Great. And we'll share all of this in the follow-up email. We'll share Cindy's website, Steph's information. We'll also share the links that we've been dropping in the chat here and everything that we've mentioned. And this is being recorded, and we'll put this up on YouTube and share the recording with you all afterwards so that you can go back. And there was so much information packed into this, so I know it'll definitely be worth a rewatch. Well, Steph and Cindy, I want to thank you so much for joining us. You are both a wealth of knowledge. And like I said, it's just really for us, it's so great to learn about this through the lens of your partnership and your friendship, and kind of taking that intimidation factor away a little bit and seeing that this can also be an enjoyable process. So really appreciate you both joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And as we end here, just a couple last things. Meredith, if you don't mind sharing that slide one more time. On this topic of labels and certifications and practices, if you are not familiar, we recently launched our Good Meat Finder, which is a national directory of not just farms and ranches, but also butcher shops, restaurants, retail, really anybody who is raising, selling, sourcing meat that is raised with ethics, with connection to land, animals, and people. You can list your business here on the Good Meat Finder, and this is a pretty unique resource. We really wanted to give consumers the agency to define and find meat that matches their own personal values. And so we have a number of different practices here, certifications, labels, business models, means of selling. And so you can really the goal here is really to connect you with the consumers that are looking for values-based meat. And so we're excited to share this. If you are not on the Good Meat Finder, it takes all of 3.5 minutes to sign up, and the link is here in the chat, and we hope to see you all on there. And last thing, we do have another Lowdown coming up. That's going to be on Thursday, May 1st at 10 a.m. And that's going to be on balancing the equation of pastured poultry production. So we're going to get into how to reduce feed costs, how to figure out your best sales models. We know that profitability in poultry, especially pastured poultry, can be a tricky topic, and getting those numbers to balance out. So we'll be diving into that. So please join us next time for our next Lowdown. And with that, thank you all so much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.